Okay, rulers, settle down. Ruler School is brought to you by Odyssey Games, where you can go to get singles for all your Force of Will and other trading card games, as well as these amazing patrons. Thank you for your support. Class is in session. Hey there, rulers! Welcome back after a long week of Force of Will. But if you have some extra questions from that Force of Will homework, you've come to the right place. It's Office Hours, your favorite ever live Force of Will podcast featuring myself, DMO73, and I am joined as always by Mike Rance, Paul's echoey microphone for some reason, as well as his as well as his whiny dog, who we love. Yeah. And then joining us is a member of the channel's longtime supporter, as well as the creator of FoW Library, Dennis. Dennis, welcome. Welcome. It's 2 a.m. where he is, so let's give him some big kikis in the chat for some big kiki energy for staying up with us tonight. Yeah, if you can't already and you're interested in being able to spread some Kiki love throughout the chat, consider clicking that join button down below and consider becoming a member of the channel. Just like Dennis, we offer all kinds of cool perks, including this new perk of being able to join us here on Office Hours, monthly membership tournaments, which are free, fun, casual events that we run throughout the course of a month with prizes that are brought to you by CCG Prime. Speaking of whom is giving away, we're doing a giveaway tonight of, I think, a playset of foreign Joan d'Arc Halloween promos in Japanese. So those are pretty cool. And yeah, other kinds of stuff too. But regardless, we're glad that you're here. We hope you enjoy it, and we do appreciate that support if you do decide to join us. As you can see, we're trying to get that next emote unlocked. We're at 82 out of 100 members. We need to get to 100 members so we can get that next emote unlocked. I think everyone besides... No, I think everyone... Oh, wait, it seems like... Oh, okay, I'm hearing they're telling me that there's something wrong with my system. Hold on, guys. I think I know what's going on. Yeah, dance while I figure this out. It's Discord's problem. Let's all go into the catacombs of Discord. Try talking now, gentlemen.
Okay. Talk, gentlemen.
Okay. And then... okay, keep talking.
I'm not going to stop.
Okay,
We are
Hold,
wordsing.
please. Okay, I think we're back. Something was going on. We're back. I don't know what was going on, but we're back now.
Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, Dratini,
regardless,
Dragonair.
They all already heard me introduce all of you, so thankfully they gave you that big Kiki energy. But we're here, and we're ready to get started. Tonight, we are joined by Dennis to talk about the wonderful topic of the differences in culture around Force of Will, both in the player base, in terms of approach to the game, enjoyment of the game, and tournaments for the game, and so on and so forth, for us here in the United States and across the pond. Dennis is very much plugged into a lot of the teams and influencers and distributors and player bases, and so he brings to us a lot of insight in regards to that piece.
Dennis is basically just the dawn of the FoW Mafia at this point, so I just...
Pretty close.
Kiss the hand, whatever.
Yeah, pretty close. So that being said, one of the first things to kind of talk about, I think, would be, Dennis, in your experience at the basic player level. So, like, not your hyper-competitive, maybe team-oriented person, not anybody like that. Just your average player of Force of Will. In your experience, what are those kinds of people looking for out of the game? How do those people approach the game? That maybe we can kind of compare and contrast to what it's like here in the United States.
That's a broad question.
It is.
Could we narrow it down a bit?
Sure. In terms of maybe approach to deck building, or what kinds of things they're interested in, like playstyle wise.
Okay, well, that's an easy one, because we made fun of the Americans, of course, back then, and only joking, of course, so nothing seriously. We found it really interesting to see that Carrick was played a lot of times.
Don't worry. We made fun of that too. It's okay.
I remember one Grand Prix. I believe it was Berlin 2019, where in the meantime in the US. Brunhild. Was it Brunhild or was it? No, it was Tigris. Tigris got first place, and we were like, "What?" So it's different play styles. So
the legends.
Would you say that the European players are more like leaning towards like an aggro, a control, a mid-range, a tempo? Like, is there a type of deck that they tend to gravitate towards, just in general?
No, they're hyper competitive. If you look at the tournament scene in, for instance, Italy and Spain, those countries have the best European players. I mean, you've got Seven Kings in Spain, you've got No Name in Italy, you've got Supini in Italy, and don't forget you also have the Germans. Germans are a bit more creative, let's say, in their deck building. Whereas the Italians and the Spaniards just go for brute force, like the best cards, put them in a deck and test the hell out of it to see how it stands in the meta. Compared to, let's say, and I don't want to, let's say anything bad about the French, but you can see that the French are a bit more, let's say, casual in that sense.
Sure.
I've seen it, yeah.
So, but that's the biggest change. So in Europe, we're hyper competitive.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. Would you say that kind of applies to like everyone playing the game? Like even at like, you know, you think of like casually playing games with friends or like at the locals. Is it still really all focused on that like real hyper competitive, like always trying to like solve the meta kind of style approach to playing and deck building? Or does that really only come out when you're talking about those like competitive players?
No, only really the competitive players. We have lots of really good players. For instance, Ming, of course, and Min just plays crappy decks. Which he is sorry, Min, I love you, but he just plays decks, and I'm like, this doesn't work, and then he just gets a top 8 like, hey, easy.
Dennis, remember, if you give him in a deck with a bunch of one-ofs, he's gonna draw the God Hand every single time. No question asked.
Well, that's really cool to hear that. To hear that there is still that diversity in terms of like you have people who are with a more casual focused or wanting to just kind of experiment and goof around with things that they enjoy, even if it's not necessarily the competitive, all the way up through the hyper competitive, like really focused. I would say that the United States over the span of the past 2 years, we were talking about this a little bit before the show, the pool of who I would consider the hyper competitive American players has shrunk, just because of different circumstances and then leading into COVID.
You know that it's not a super competitive format when I'm considered a competitive player.
Yeah, well, I'm not gonna take that dig at you, but also at the same time, like the variety of like the high end competitive players who are really on that grind has just naturally decreased. And so I think we in the US see those players come out of the woodwork typically like when it's a GP in a popular location or right before Worlds. But beyond that, I would say that's a big difference between us and the Europe is that I can't imagine talking about testing or preparing for a European tournament and not having to think in my mind, okay, I got to worry about Lars, I got to worry about No Name, I got to worry about Seven Kings, I got to JPK, I got to worry about kind of have to worry about Min based on how lucky he's feeling that day. I had to, you know, like all of those names immediately pop to mind when I think of like traveling to any European tournament. Whereas in the United States, it's like, well, this one's in Ohio, so probably the West Coasters aren't coming. Florida's probably not going to make it. Like,
the U.S. is too big, honestly.
A little bit, but also I think there's that difference of player base. So I guess the next question is then, Dennis, and chat, this is a wonderful opportunity to pick Dennis's brain. So if you guys have any questions for him, he's watching the chat as well. If you have any questions about his insights into things, feel free to ask. What for the competitive teams, Dennis? Like, what does their approach to testing, approach to the game, like their focus on the game when they have this hyper competitive mindset, like what does that look like? How does that play out among those hyper competitive players?
I think it's the same as we mentioned this earlier before, let's say the stream started, in that a lot of gauntlets are being started and tested. So what we do, for instance, and this is also a nice thing just to mention, I'm in Team New Frontiers, so I'm wearing the tricot because, hey, my team.
Yeah.
But we have, let's say, 2 levels of play. So we have a team which is, let's say, casual, and it's a big team. And we have a team, so sub-team, which is really competitive. So also within the team, we have, let's say, 2 different mindsets. And the casual team just has fun and plays around, whereas the competitive team tries to meet as often as possible, at least 2-3 times a year. So before a Grand Prix starts, I'm mostly the person trying to find a location, getting everyone together, then testing a week long, so really 24/7, and then doing the Grand Prix. But before that, we use Lackey or Untap, mostly Lackey. Or personally, I use Lackey because, hey.
Yeah, I mean, you work on it a lot, so that's fair.
To do some final testing and, well, that's basically it. But I do believe that most or some American teams do the same.
Yeah, I would say that Rogues Guild is probably now Rogues Guild is now a team who does those kinds of gauntlet things even in the off season, like even when a GP isn't available. Like it's kind of like this constant, and that's how they do content, right? That's how they approach content, is like constantly doing these gauntlets. But I think I would agree with you that like week before a GP, like all in grind is what we see typically come out of those like really competitive Force of Will players. I think of like the week before Worlds. It's like, hey guys, you want to go to Akihabara? No. You gotta learn a deck. We gotta play a deck for 9 hours straight.
Jeremy, I want to answer one question because
sure.
Matt asked in the chat, Dennis, why Force of Will over everything else you could be playing? And there's only one answer, and that's the community. I've met so many great people with Force of Will. It's incredible. I've met people from Spain, France, Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, US, Japan, Australia, and all great people. So, and you don't see that in another.
Dennis was almost going to be in the United States for a Grand Prix, and then COVID happened. So
yeah, too bad. Otherwise, I would have seen most of you in Dallas.
Yeah, he was almost going to be there for that, but then that happened. Next question from CCG Prime: what criteria do you use when developing a gauntlet? Like what in your mind, what makes it into what you're going to play against when you're trying to run a deck through and figure it out? Dennis, any insights?
To be really honest, I totally missed the question because I was looking at the stream in the meantime. So I was like, okay, how am I going to answer that question? So what does Dan want?
When developing a gauntlet, so you say you're at that week before the Grand Prix, you sat down and you say, okay, this is the deck that we want to run through. What we, how do we figure out, or what could you share about how you figure out what gets put into the gauntlet to run a deck through? Like, what are we playing against this deck? What decides whether that's something that's worth giving your attention to or just trash it?
Well, you first start with the let's say the actual meta, or let's say the previous meta, and just have a look. Okay, what kind of influence do the new cards have on this meta? Is there any deck, let's say a new deck idea archetype, which is able to, let's say, beat the current one? Let's say that's all theoretical. The real answer is you just grab guys like JP, Lars, and maybe even some others, and just ask them, "Hey,
Lars
guys,
literally
could you
just
just
said
help
Dennis.
out?"
Yeah,
and-
like Lars. Yeah, Lars did just say in the chat. Dennis asks me. Sounds
So, hey, Lars, why are you still awake?
probably
Yeah,
because
same thing.
yeah, we could ask you. So, so here's a question for you. In regards to moving beyond the competitive, for just a minute, like general approach to what, in your mind, what you've experienced is like what people are getting out of Force of Will. Like, do you find that it's still mostly due to just people enjoying the game? Is it that they enjoy the characters, the community, like the prizing? Because I know that Europe in general has like typically better support programs for players than the United States, which comes up
because of the distributor.
Yeah, the distributors are a big part of it. So do you find that there's a lot of like similarity there, or themes is about like what brings a player to Force of Will and keeps them there? I'd be interested.
That's basically the same. I mean, it's the. I hope I pronounce it correctly. It's the waifus and the husbandos, and it's the lore, and it's everything. I mean, it's the big boobs. It's
Can confirm.
I mean, I guess it's good to know that we have those similarities, right?
Everybody's the same, man.
Well, that's good. I mean, we've
Dennis,
talked.
who's your waifu for Force of Will?
I'm gonna kick
my
you.
waifu.
I'm gonna kick you, Mike. I've done it before. I'll do it again.
No, this is real hard hitting stuff. This is what the people want.
This is journalism, Jeremy.
I was kind of into Viola.
Ooh.
It's a good choice.
So
It's a strong
Viola
choice.
or Viola or Fiola? Because we got
Viola.
Viola.
So
I mean Fiola though.
Can you-
That's spirit.
can you talk a little bit about, kind of the differences about what the distributor process is like there? Because in the United States there's like 12, and they're pretty much just product pushers. They don't really do much beyond just that.
And that's the biggest difference.
And so maybe you can speak to a little bit about when we talk about distributors overseas, like what's different there.
Well, each distributor has its own community because each country has its own distributor. For
Sure.
instance, in Germany, we used to have Amigo. Now it's another one. Amigo quit. Not a big difference anyway. In France, we have Distrib, which is being run by great people. In Italy, we have Game Trade, I believe, which is also run by great people. I know in Spain right now, we have Alejandro, so Five's world champion, who is working on that as well behind the scenes. So each country has its own Force of Will login or its own Force of Will, let's say, website, its own products, its own local tournament scene. And that's a really, really big difference compared to the US, where everything's put together. I mean, it would be great if there were dedicated distributors for, let's say, specific areas in the US, and then doing the same thing as, let's say, a country does in Europe.
Yeah, I know that there were talks about, I specifically remember talking with Rob about this before Rob left, is that there were things in motion to try to get something like the FoW system in place here in the United States, but then
true, I heard that as well.
Things just kind of fell through. It would be really nice if we had something like that, because I look to what, and as a benefit to US players, I know that the Italian site can be translated to English, and like United States players are allowed to create accounts there to be able to like look at deck lists and stuff. So that's great. But that is one of the things that I wish we had that you guys get to enjoy, is much more hands-on distributors and not as much competition between distributors, because there's only just one or two, and that they're much more involved than anything else. Matt's asking what your opinion on the game / company I Spy is now, because you've been here pretty much just as long as I have. Do you think Force of Will's in a good place? How with the game itself? So we'll go one question at a time, Matt. You're asking too many questions. So Dennis, in your opinion, as someone like me who's been pretty much with the game since the get-go. What's kind of your opinion on where the game is now, like where the company is now, like how I Spy's doing?
Okay, well, I Spy is really doing good. Don't get me wrong, I really, really like AG and the way he, let's say, started the whole Force of Will was great, but he just made some, let's say, mistakes, or let's say he could have done some things the other way to make it better. But now with I Spy, it's looking good. Sadly, communication is lacking. So having, let's say, no one like Jeff, for instance, let's say a global liaison is to be honest. For instance, as owner of Force of Will Library, I've tried to contact Force of Will lots of times because I have a platform. It's a small platform, but still, it's a possibility for them to get more people. They never responded. And then I reached out to the distributors in Europe and asked, hey, is there a possibility for me to get into contact? And they're like, hey, if we can get into contact, then don't even bother. So
yeah. Yep, I get that for sure. And we've talked about before about communication is definitely the thing that maybe can be done better. But I would agree with you that I think I Spy has been making a lot of good decisions.
But we'll have to wait until the Grand Prix starts, because now we're in COVID times, and I really believe that as soon as we have Grand Prix again, then we will see, or then we will be able to see how many new players came into the game, how many left, how big the attendance will be for each Grand Prix, and only then will we be able to, let's say, make a proper judgment.
Sure. Yeah, the fact that COVID started about halfway into Alice Origin Cluster means that we've only seen about 2 sets worth of what I Spy's decision making really has brought to the game.
Right.
Not only that, but think about it. As soon as a Grand Prix starts, we have 22 rulers, which we haven't tested competitively yet. Now we're getting a new cluster with maybe 5, 6, 7 new rulers. So let's say that as soon as the competitive season really starts, we have like 30 rulers. We have a whole bunch of cards which we haven't really interacted or tested properly yet. Of course, most teams did, but
in a big environment, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that's going to be awesome.
So here's the next question that I can build off of, Matt. So in the United States, and a little bit Canada, more so just the United States, we tend to see what I would like to call like fear spikes, which is like this kind of really rapid rise, this really rapid rise of concern in regards to what are believed to be degenerate decks. And when I say degenerate, most oftentimes the United States players assign degenerate to very, very fast kills. That tends to be what gets assigned to it more. Don't get me wrong, we have properly assigned the word degenerate to control decks that have been that way. But more so than not, the United States player base really likes to assign that word to really very, very fast kills that don't require a lot of effort. And we see a lot of spikes in fear and language about that being indicative of a negative game state or a bad health game state. I would be curious to see or to hear about if you've noticed similar things in the European communities, or maybe a different approach to it. Maybe they move on beyond the fear faster, or what, how that would be different.
No, I think it's the same, but the biggest difference is because we have our local distributors, or let's say each country has its own distributor. Each distributor is also able to come up with, let's say, a ban list for local tournaments. This is something, for instance, which happened in Frankfurt 2 years ago, where we played, I believe it was Cluster. Was it Cluster? Anyway, we had a ban list where we banned, this is a trick question. Which card were banned? I believe it was Ceiling Scroll and another card, which totally threw the meta around. In the end, it was Isis and Atom, and Atom got first place. So we have our distributors who can always interact if needed. But if you look at the let's say the chats for me, then the German group, it's basically the same. So if there's a new card which is broken, then there will be people who will, or not broken, extremely good. Sorry, there will be people who will scream it's broken, and well, you have that all. It's always so.
Do you find that bears an impact on the community as a whole, or do people more tend to just shrug that off as like, yeah, okay, you're worried about something, it's not a big deal?
I can only speak for the German community, and in the German community, we have Lars, we have JP, we have Roman, we have lots of voices of lots of really good players who will then answer the question and say like, hey, relax, we've seen worse, let's just wait, and they will comment on let's say the hype. So
sure,
and that's something which is missing in, let's say, Force of Will Global. For now, we talked about it as well before the stream started. Maybe we need to make sure that more people who have been into Force of Will longer try to calm down, let's say, the masses as soon as something like that starts again.
Yeah, I would say that
because we're not in a bad shape.
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot of this. The negativity spikes up, and the people who we either don't have enough of the old seasoned voices speaking truth to like, hey, that's not a big deal, like relax, but we also don't have the like newer players who aren't experiencing that, or who are like approaching the game in a different way so that that's not actually really a detriment to their enjoyment of the game, sharing that part too. Because I think so many times, especially in the global community, when something gets really spiky, it's like, oh, newer players aren't going to want to play this game because this is a problem. And like seasoned players like myself or Dennis or Mike, like we can't really counter that argument because we're seasoned.
Yeah, all kind of left off.
We're seasoned hardcore. I mean, like we're seasoned hardcore players who've been here for a very long time, so we can't really speak to like, no, a new player wouldn't see this as being a problem. But also the new
Jeremy, the game also evolves.
Yeah, exactly.
Meaning that if you take a look at what used to be the top deck, just take Force of Will Library, for instance. Go to 2016 or something like that. Look at the top 8 list. Look at the decks which got first place. Now compare those decks to the list we got nowadays. You will see an increase in power level, which is beyond comprehensive. But hey, we're used to that, and the game is still fun. But for someone who got out of Force of Will and then looks at it from, let's say, from the side and sees this new power level, he will go like, okay, maybe this isn't something the players want. Well, that's not true. I mean, I totally love the game how it is now. Sure, we've got a lot of strong, absurdly strong cards. For instance, Institute, Ultra, the new Golem, the Six Sages Stone, the Six Sages, Chua. There are lots of cards which are really, really, really good. But hey, that's the game. That's the evolving which we are now seeing. So.
Yeah, for sure. I would agree wholeheartedly. I'm trying to see if there's any other questions from Matt's list. Oh, he's wondering if you would describe, in your experience of playing with these cards, and like the diversity and everything else that you've experienced, if you think that Force of Will is coming into the new golden age. So if you maybe haven't heard that, Dennis, golden age was typically designed was. The term Golden Age was coined by Benjamin Bargetzi before he stopped playing.
Ben and I used to be close.
The Golden Age was considered to be like the time when Force of Will was the most diversive in a very clear way and healthy and balanced in that way.
It was also the format with the most mid-range decks at the top.
Sure.
You had Lumia, Feats, Turbo Feating,
Black Blue Valentina for a lot of different reasons.
Valentina.
So the question kind of becomes like with what we're seeing now with the Sages and Saga Cluster and everything else. Do you think that we could be approaching that space again of being like a new golden age?
Ooh, difficult question because we didn't have any competitive
Events,
tournaments yet.
yeah.
The events will tell us how diverse the meta actually is. If everyone's playing, for instance, let's say Lilius or some other deck, then it's not really inviting, and then
Sure.
I wouldn't call it a golden days. So we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully this year there will be the new Grand Prix again, and if so, then hopefully a lot of diversity. So, and I'm expecting that. I mean, we've got 22 rulers right now. We're gonna go to almost 30. I mean, the top 8 should be diverse, or everyone is gonna play Mudyard Feetsing or Milas Feetsing or Gruz Balesta Feet, something with Feetsing. But we'll have to wait and see.
What? No, Feetsing? Why would you play Feetsing? Of course we're not good.
Next question is: do you see the game continuing to speed up or slow down? This is a good question for Dennis, because I think Dennis has a very different opinion.
Yes, yes, we've got lots of explosive combinations right now. If you take a look at, we have one with Milas Feetsing where you can search for Oberos, and then you can play him with resistance, and you can do this turn 1, and it will drop your opponent's life total to 2,000, then attack and just win the game. Yes, we have these combos, but we also have Welser. We also have lots of control tools available. So I really do believe that the meta is getting slower because there are so many answers, good answers to the explosive decks. Oh, yes, you have the possibility to FTK with Wolfgang, but first you have to make sure that you're actually able to deal lethal damage. And most of the decks have an answer to these decks. And because each and every deck has an answer to it, the meta becomes slower because now you're going into more control.
Something big that people talk about a lot with the Wolfgang FTK, just piggybacking off of here, Dennis. A lot of the problems that people say is like, hey, so a lot of colors have answers to the Wolfgang FTK except for, say, like red and black on turn 1, because black doesn't have any immediate removal spells, technically speaking. Red doesn't have any like specific answers to, say, the Yogg-Sothoth that comes down, gives everybody swiftness, and gives that blanket effect. However, people just forget that they can just sideboard the colorless bounce spell, and if you bounce the Yogg-Sothoth, the Wolfgang player loses the game.
Mm-hmm. There's only one thing. Now we're talking about sideboarding. Maybe I can just ask the chat, or maybe ask you guys, because this is something where we're still struggling how this is going to be resolved. You have, let's say, a ruler.
Oh, this is the can you sideboard into dual rulers? So
exactly.
So the question is, and Dennis brings this up, and this is a wonderful point, and that we still need to figure this out, because we talk about like there's this very real possibility of the meta getting slower because like there's more options and more counters. If this works the way we think it's going to work, that gets even worse. Like there's even more like counter picking that can be done, which is the idea of if you start with a singleton ruler, can you sideboard into dual rulers and vice versa? According to the current deck construction rules, the only limitation to sideboarding is that you have to have the same number of cards out as the same number of cards in, and that your deck has to be minimum 40, minimum 10 stones, and you can't have more than 4 copies of anything. So the idea being that if you're playing a singleton ruler, you can put 41 cards in your main deck, take out a card from your main, take out your ruler, put into dual rulers, and then you've technically abided by all of the requirements, and now you have dual rulers. This has not been confirmed as being allowed by the company, so we need to wait and find out. But if it does, it opens up so many possibilities of making those changes.
Another interesting thing is when you're in sudden death, so you are currently 1-1, and then for the third game you just side into Almerius and you go like, hey, we're almost in timeout, I've got 7,000 life, so who's gonna win?
I mean, you can already do that by just single siding in an Almerius.
So to speak to what Dennis was talking about this idea of a slower meta because there's more things that answers, we've talked about, the way I kind of bring it is that there's a kind of an ever shifting meta of like things chasing each other. where this to me, and Dennis, you can maybe speak to it as well, it feels like a meta where as something becomes popular, the meta can shift to meet it. And then that becomes popular, so the meta shifts again to meet it. So that becomes popular, the meta shifts again to meet it. It's one of these positions where that was a big hallmark of the Golden Age format, where like if a deck was predicted to be more popular at an event, it was very easy to like then build towards countering that. And then we got this kind of like cyclical nature of like what was popular and what was played in the meta, kind of solving the meta, right? This to me, maybe disagree or not, it feels like a similar kind of space. Whereas something becomes more popular, we know that there are answers to it, so those answers become more popular, and that deck that can run those answers effectively becomes more popular, and so on and so forth and so on and so forth. Alexander Munoz, have a good day. I don't need you to be here if you're bringing that kind of language, so goodbye. Have a good day. Bye.
I don't even know who that guy is.
I don't either, but this is a Force of Will podcast, and we don't need people talking about that kind of stuff on my podcast. So, bye.
If the game is dead, podcast equals here.
If the game is dead, we wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't be here at, what is it now, almost 3 in the morning. So, but back to the question. If we compare, let's say, the current meta to the one we had in 2017, where we had Fox and we had Prisia. So the issue was that, and I really have to think, because it's been a while. So as far as I remember, is that there were decks who were able to beat Fox, but the problem was that Prisia just slaughtered them. So you had this nasty meta where you only had Fox and Prisia, and in the end it was Fox. So just have a look at Worlds 2017, Blue Fox versus the let's say the classical Fox.
I'm gonna reserve my hot take from that, but continue.
Okay, that was a bad meta.
I would agree.
And I really believe that we do not have a meta like that, because we have so many answers available in so many colors. But now comes the most important part. We're able to play multicolored decks. So we're always able to splash in answers from other colors. So I really believe that the current meta, with all the tools we have, multicolored, lots of answers to, let's say, explosive decks, could give us a great meta. But we have to wait until we have the first events to actually see if it's correct.
Rusty Spork, yeah, welcome. Glad to have you here. Glad that you found your way here as a new player. So awesome. I would agree. And Dennis, as someone who sent 2 teammates to a United States event to steal our money recently, I would also. Would you agree that the previous Rezard meta felt very similar in regards to like the Fox of being a bad meta? It was like, this is like what you have to play.
The Rezard deck not really is anymore, but let's say was too explosive. And you had this is also interesting, because I really want to take the opportunity to explain something. We have 2 camps in Europe.
Yes.
We have, let's say, camp Spain, and maybe also a bit Italy, where we have the Dreams list. And the Dreams list is really explosive. It's really, really good. We also have let's say, the German version, which is more creative, which isn't relying on Dreams. And since I know both communities, I can only say that both communities are right in the way they see their deck list. And I do not believe there is one single version which rules them all. I really believe that Rezard is just too broken and can be played in multiple ways. So yes, to answer your question, the Rezard meta was a bit, let's say, bad for the game. I mean, a good example. I played in France last year. I wanted to play Magna. In the end, Min played Magna and got top 8. But I played against Lars, and Lars just slaughtered me with his Lena deck. And I was like, oh, and after so many losses, I went like, okay, now I have to play something good. So I contacted Alejandro and like, Alejandro, you got a deck for me? He's like, yeah, sure, here, got the Dreams list. And then Roman told me, well, I've also got this version, but it's more complex. And I'm like, okay, I've got 1 day to learn the deck. I'll go for the Dreams list. And I almost got top 8. It was the first time playing the deck because I hardly played back then due to work. So the deck is just too absurdly strong to, yeah.
And I think that's one of the differences, when we talk about this term explosive, the explosiveness that we're seeing from decks now is what I would call like one trick explosive, where like if it's going to explode, you know how it's going to explode. Like as a player, as the person who is going to be playing against you, if you start to try to pop off, I already know how you're going to do it. Like I already know what the play line is, and I know when, and I can, as such, in knowing what the play line is, I know when to stop it, and it's very vulnerable in that regard.
So I think very interesting about this idea.
Okay, fine, Mike, ignore me. Don't let me finish my sentence.
No, I wanted to. That was a really good point to piggyback off of because I want to talk about, because a lot of people think of explosive, like these OTK, FTK decks, these decks that just do this like super crazy combo over and over again and loop things out. The problem is, if your deck only does that, it's not a deck that's going to win games. The reason that something like that degenerate Sigurd Alter Athenia OTK that was played from AO3 to AO4 formats was because the deck was also just a Kaguya mid-range deck. Which is insane.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm speaking of. Like, explosive now is this like one trick explosion that I hope gets me lethal, but it always looks the same. Whereas if we look at like Rezard or the Alter stuff, explosive meant value, but the value always looked different. Like, and the value could like change based on what it needed to be at the time. Like the Dreams version, the Alta version, everything else. So like explosive, yes, but it was always shifting, and that I think is what led to some of the degeneracy of it. Because like even if you thought you had an answer, the Rezard player could just pivot and like explode in a different way. Which I think is different to what we're seeing now from this explosiveness, and I think is why it's not really indicative of an unhealthy meta, is because like the explosion is this. It will always be this. It's very hard to adapt or change what this is. And like Dennis was saying is, and I think Dennis's experience and what we're hearing from some of the European players who've been more actively grinding some of the higher end tier play, is that they're answerable. Like they're very answerable when you want to try to do the same thing over and over again. And so it's cool to hear that Europe is already kind of taking that mindset. And I really hope that we have that happen more here in Europe. So it's refreshing to hear from you, Dennis.
Well, yes and no, because we figure out that it's more, let's say, into value.
Yeah.
But now the biggest question is, will there be only one deck which beats all the other value decks? We're still unsure, of course. You've got multiple, let's say, decks currently. I've seen a really gross Almerius Feetsing deck. Hi, Lars. I've seen an incredibly interesting Mujar Feetsing deck, both from Roman, a specific build, and one from Alejandro, which I personally love. But I'm a sucker for everything what Alejandro builds, but also what Roman builds. So I always think, let's say, the best of both worlds. But it's going to be a control-ish meta, and we're not sure how many decks really fit in there. Could be a lot of decks. But you could, but for now, you can say, okay, Wolfgang is not a control deck. Lilius is not a control deck. Those decks really don't stand a chance currently. Well, not in, let's say, the high end.
And not in like a competitive like tournament day. Like you might steal games here and there. You might steal matches here and there when you're just like playing with friends or like jamming random games online. But if you put it in,
after Swiss 9-7 rounds, you won't see them on the top.
Yeah, for sure. Real quick, Joshua Drark managed to get a few people in Force of Will at my local game store. Great work. I would have to teach teach someone how to teach them the rules, we have a wonderful tutorial series that you can show them. It's called Force of Will 101. It's a very easy way to teach them the rules. The only thing that's not in there right now are strangers. We don't have
by the way,
we don't have a video on strangers, so that's it.
I saw Manadork writing something about Gil Elementals. Yes, Gil is also all about value, and I personally loved that deck. It gave, by the way, Philip, one of my team members, 2 invites. So that's interesting.
And that's one of the things that I think we've seen in Force of Will is like when the control metas are there, we don't see as much like I maybe I'm wrong, but we don't see as much like negativity. Like we see like frustrations and people being like, ugh, it's hard to beat this control deck. But I don't think we see as much like worry about the game.
No, because
kind of negativity.
You play longer than 1 or 2 turns, but eventually the turn. I mean, by the time it's turn T, it's already clear which deck is going to win. But the control deck just takes a bit longer to seal the game. So the player playing against it is like, hey, I'm still alive. But in the meantime, it's like, oh, okay, I'm just waiting for the good draw.
Yeah, for sure. So remember that, players, and remember that just because we have a lot of this explosive stuff doesn't mean that defines the meta as a whole. And also like there's so much more out there that you don't have to like. It's one of those things where if you know it's there, then you can stop it. And that is a different kind of explosiveness than we've seen before. And the homework for the community is really to share your experiences about stopping that explosiveness or times when it didn't work out for you. Because the more we can kind of help people move past that mindset, I think the quicker we can move people to this like, oh wait, things are actually really great right now. Which is awesome.
If someone is posting something in global or somewhere else and you do not really agree, then just post and say, okay, there are answers, and just mention the cards.
Yep. And even just doing something like that, I think would go a long way, because I think we see that happen more consistently in the behind the scenes, but we kind of could use it more in the public. At least until we get distributors who can make their own independent ban lists here in the United States. Could the United States be divided into 50 different countries? Maybe, probably not.
Maybe. Well, probably.
Some of us want it to be, not me.
Yeah. So I'm trying to see if there's any other questions. Anybody else have any other questions for Dennis here in the chat? Otherwise,
I got a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So, Dennis, if there was one thing you would like to see happen culturally in Force of Will, what would that next step be? Is that it?
I would love to see worlds being held in multiple locations. So in the US, in Europe.
I like
Yeah, I haven't been there yet, but it will help a lot, because it will also help the company, because let's say a lot of players attending Worlds are either from the US or from Europe. So if you're going to host it in one of those countries, it's going to be cheaper, more possibilities. I would also like to see a European tournament. And let's say back to also a US-based tournament. So really more like those kind of tournaments.
Jeff Finnegan has entered the chat. Hi, Jeff.
Oh, is that? Hi, Jeff.
Everybody say hi, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
You should also be asleep, Jeff.
Is that you?
He should be asleep. I'm pretty sure. Jeff, is that you?
No, for Jeff, like in Japan, it's now maybe 7 or 8 in the morning. If
that's true.
Later.
Yeah. Well, good morning, Jeff.
He just woke up.
Speaking of the ban list for Force of Will, who's in charge of it? Currently, the company is in charge.
Currently, the answer is what ban list?
It doesn't really get enforced very much. It doesn't really get implemented because the company is very, at least nowadays, with no one like Jeff heavily advocating for a ban list, is very heavy tournament data driven, and we haven't had tournaments, so it just hasn't been updated for a long time.
Hold on. Jeremy...
don't interrupt me.
Okay.
I'm answering a question.
I was going to say, there is a ban list.
There is a ban list. It's out of date.
It has the World Dreams on it.
The Wanderer ban list is primarily run by Dennis and the Wanderer ban list committee. That's the fan-oriented Wanderer ban list. Conqueror ban list is operated by Mike Rantz. The Epic Stories ban list is moderated by Cal Tuma and Frank Klosser. And the New Frontiers doesn't have a ban list. It has one, but there's never been enough data in the recent year and a half to support actual action on a card. So there's your answer.
True, but if a banning is needed, then in Europe before a tournament, the distributor will be or is allowed to implement bannings, and in Germany already did so. Yeah.
Anthony Esparra, do you think the dual Sage rulers are going to push away the other rulers from the block? Kind of goes back to kind of what Dennis said, is we would need to see in a tournament setting once we get more cards, especially considering the mini set is supposedly supposed to be S1 support. So like that could have a big influence on whether or not those rulers can continue to keep up. So
the two most broken decks in Wanderer, and this is thanks to Team 7 Kings, who did the streaming yesterday on Twitch, are not 6 Sages based.
Yeah. Mike.
They're divinity based.
I told you to stop interrupting me. You did. What did you want to say?
Oh, I fucking forget, dude.
Give it up for Mike Rantz, everybody. Well, on that note, then, it's a really good time to do our giveaway. This giveaway is being brought to you by CCG Prime, ccgprime.com. He has over 100,000 singles now. Better prices on his actual website, ccgprime.com, than his listings on TCG Player. Promos, sealed products, singles from all the way back to Valhalla. So much stuff that Dan has available. So check that out.
Writer for Force of Will Library.
Valued writer for Force of Will Library. But you can also check a link in the description to get that. So here is the question for tonight. You have until 10 o'clock once I give the question. Dennis, as a guest tonight, what question do you want to ask our chat for them to be entered into the contest?
What was the question last time? So I have a reference.
The question last time, I think, was what's your favorite 6 Sage pair?
Okay. Do I have to come up with a question now, or do I still have a few minutes to think about it?
Now, just off the cuff.
Okay.
Geography.
Oh dear.
Go.
Favorite ruler, not in New Frontiers.
Don't let him think. Let the man think.
Your favorite original Valhalla card?
That no one will know. That is a very hard question for our people to answer.
That's a topic for next week, though.
Because we don't have enough. We don't have enough people with experience with Valhalla right now.
Okay. We'll stream it. It's fine.
Just everybody put Black Order.
Mermaid card. Best card.
Okay, let's see. Favorite race type.
Favorite race. That's a good one. Favorite race. So you have 3 minutes. I'm going to set a timer for 3 minutes. Get in the chat. Let us know your favorite race.
Saw elementals. So that's one. That's a really good one, of course. And I read a post on Global regarding spirits. So spirits is another interesting one, of course.
Getting your questions. So give me those races.
Merman.
Jeff Finnegan getting in on it.
Okay, now in the meantime, I'm going to answer a few older questions.
Sure.
Rustin asked a long time ago, maybe an hour ago, what playstyle I'm leaning towards in the recent sets. Currently, hard control. I'm into Moodjart featsing. And let's see, what else do we have? I read something about if I knew people from Malaysia or the community. I do remember I know one or two players. Haven't spoken to them in a while now, so should reach out to them again. What else do we have? A lot of spam by Lars.
Out of that one.
I'm not allowed to talk about France, okay?
Sure, man.
That's anywhere that's so true. No, Nightmares get no love anymore. They were forgotten.
No, it's fine. No one's listed the best race, so
I just did. I put fruit.
it's not. It's not.
All right, Jeremy.
It's vampire, and you're wrong.
I thought you were for sure gonna say fairy tale, but okay.
It's definitely vampire.
Honestly, that's honestly true.
There's only one race fruit in the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Alice. Anyway.
There's two. There's
Which card
two.
is that? Because you said fruit. Is that the same card?
It's the
which
it's
Ryan
the 2-drop 08 that draws a card when it enters.
Fruit
Oh, the card
Syndicate.
that Ryan played in his Fox back then.
Yep. Fruit was
Fruit and
meta.
Yggdrasil.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just remember, if you leave the fruit out long enough, it'll ripen and turn into a pickle. Funny shit I've ever seen.
Okay.
Jeremy's trying so hard not to kick me right now.
I'm trying very hard. It is closed. Dennis, I need a number between 5 and 11.
Oh, that's 7.
7 it is.
Look at this guy, 7 kings in it up.
Okay, here we go. 1,
597.
2, 3, 4,
I will
5,
start this again.
6, 7. Our winner is Victoria Rebels.
Oh my god,
Victoria!
Again? Oh, yeah.
Congratulations, you are our winner. I will get your address again, and we will get you those promos courtesy of ccgprime.com. Huge thanks to Dan for hooking us up with those to give away. And with that is going to call it to a close for us tonight. Dennis, it has been wonderful to have you with us. Thank you for staying up and joining us.
It was really fun.
If you would like to consider joining us on a future office hours and you are not already a member here on the channel, consider clicking that join button down below. Get access to all kinds of cool perks like all the Kiki emotes that I'm sure are being spammed in the chat right now, and the chances to participate in our monthly free tournaments and all kinds of other bonus fun stuff. We really appreciate it. Other than that, we hope you enjoyed tonight, and if you did, be sure to talk about it and let people know, and hopefully invite them to join us for next time. We'll catch you this Wednesday for FoW Wednesday, where we're going to play some cluster stuff, which will be very, very fun, as well as try out the cube in sealed play instead of draft. That should be very, very fun. And until next time, this has been myself, DMO73, and I have been joined by, as always, Mike Rantz.
Hey, bye everyone.
Paul Reisman. And
Hi, everyone. Hey, Mike, don't interrupt me.
And our good friend Dennis.
Okay.
So it was really fun. Hope to see everyone soon in a Grand Prix nearby.
So until next time, class dismissed. Have a good night, everybody.